Please welcome Jess and Joe to talk about collaboration is key, unlocking the strategies to promoting OERs on campus through joint work between faculty and librarians.
Jump in first.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Joe Latrice here, Electronic Systems Librarian at the University of Dubuque.
I'm Jess Conlon. I'm one of the reference and instruction librarians, specifically for the science departments.
So we were going to be joined by our colleagues, Christopher Dahl, who is the director of the library here at the University of Dubuque, as well as Adam Hoffman, who is a professor in the DNAS, the Department of Natural and Applied Sciences. Unfortunately, circumstances being what they are, they had to leave for a variety of reasons. So we'll cover the majority of what they were going to talk about. I will start with what our fearless leader, Christopher Dahl, was going to cover on his work with the administration and some of the things that we did in order to jumpstart some of the conversations with OERs on campus. I'll also talk about particularly my work as the electronic systems librarian, what I did to support the systems that we use for faculty publications. I'll leave it up to Jess how much or how little she wants to cover of Adam's stuff. So there was a, speaking on Christopher Dahl's notes that he left us, there was a few conversations that we had going into kind of what we wanted to look at in our situation at the University of Dubuque, starting in the fall of 2018, librarians meeting at the IPAL, the Iowa Private Academic Libraries director meeting, started discussing essentially what OERs are and what do they want to do about it. Starting that conversation of who wants to take lead on this, what would this look like implemented on a university level. It looks like after the meeting, he then approached our Vice President of Academic Affairs on campus, Mark Ward, and asked if the library would be one of the ones to take the lead on this at the university level. This kind of compounds into a presentation that we went to the following spring at the Library Technical Conference in McAllister, at McAllister College in Minnesota. It was titled Press Books and Associated Technologies. Chris and I both attended that and got information on what the state of Minnesota had been doing in partnership with the University of Minnesota Systems. There was an on-campus conference that we held at the University of Dubuque in the fall of 2019 that Chris Dahl took the lead on in order to promote the OER materials to faculty members themselves. It was at our Teaching and Learning Conference, August 14th, and it was titled OER, Open Access, DRM-Free eBooks and You. The concept was how faculty members can take the lead and ownership of what that would look like in the classrooms, what benefits it would show, some things that have already been said in the conference the last couple of days. And really, this was the first time that we've approached the faculty themselves speaking about OERs. That same August, the university, in a couple of discussions that we had with vendors, moved ahead and purchased a subscription to EBSCO's Faculty Select. If you're unfamiliar with that, Faculty Select is a combination of open access repositories and open educational resource repositories that are all hosted under EBSCO's umbrella. It allows them to be seamlessly found in the catalog. It allows them to be found on EBSCO's platforms. And it's something that we wanted to go ahead and show our support for open access and open educational resources by moving ahead and purchasing this platform. That same fall, with the work that I had done, which I'll mention a bit later, we published a faculty member's open educational resource textbook and added it to our catalog. It was the first faculty created open educational resource that we published at UD. Moving forward with that as our kind of benchmark of what the process would look like, what the system we're utilizing is, how we went about publishing that. There was a working group that was started the next year in 2020 for faculty who were interested in creating their OER. The majority of the meetings were handled either in person And then that quickly shifted for who knows what reason in 2020 to being mostly by email, Zoom meetings, team meetings, et cetera. In the fall of that same year, Chris approached IPAL, again, the Iowa Private Academic Libraries Group, about writing a GEER grant, the Governor's Emergency Educational Relief, to support OER adoption and creation at the Iowa private universities. That the original proposal was for UD to take the head on it and basically implement it and move forward with it. But because it needed to be a culmination of efforts in the IPAL groups, Chris and Jenny Breams from Dordt College in the university or in the state of Iowa decided that if an IPAL institute wanted to be a part of the grant, that they would need a letter of support from upper administration. This was done to help inform upper management that libraries are the ones taking the lead in the initiative. There also needed to be a librarian from each campus in charge of promoting the grant and working with faculty on any issues they came across. I heard from a few other presenters in their groups that the collaboration between the faculty member and the librarian in pulling together the resources and necessary information was a huge help. And so they wanted to include that as a key piece in the grant information if a library wanted to participate in that. So in February of 2021, IPAL received that GEER grant for a total of $250,000 in continuing along again with some of the conversations that the other sessions had, having the support from upper administration, from faculty, having the buy-in, like the monetization of it definitely helps with doing that. Faculty from 18 IPAL institutions were paid an amount between $1,000 for adopting an OER in their course and up to $10,000 to create an OER, basically write their own textbook, create their own open educational resource for their classes. They were able to apply for that grant and it was paid out to the university. All of that application piece was a part of the institutions that participated in this grant proposal. So within that time frame and within some of the work that Chris was doing on the side of the administration, Chris and I worked very closely together to make sure that we had the support laid out in the technical side of things. So in the spring of 2019, when we attended that library technical conference, and I approached Chris with, hey, wouldn't this be cool if we could do that? That was about the same time that he was already discussing with our Vice President of Academic Affairs, Mark Ward, whether or not we could take the lead on things. What that ended up looking like was separate from what they talked about at the presentation. The meat and potatoes of the presentation that they gave was that the University of Minnesota systems, along with the state library systems, work together to implement Pressbooks in their cataloging systems. And what that looks like on their end is anyone can sign up for an account through the state library system in Pressbooks, create their own book, open educational resource, anything that they would like to do on Pressbooks, go through the editing process, the publication process, and it would be added into their catalog, not only the state library catalog system, but also the university system. University of Dubuque doesn't have that kind of scale, and we also don't have the means to essentially do any of that. Part of what we looked at primarily was servicing professors on campus that we knew were already working on this. So the details that we put into it were really the working pieces of what faculty members were already doing in conversations with the DNAS professor, who's not Adam Hoffman, who wrote their own textbook. Was essentially just a conversation that we had and said, you have a 400-page PDF, and it is impossible to read through that entire PDF to get to all the content that the students are doing because they're doing the scroll of doom. They're just constantly like going through all of these and skipping around on it. So we presented this as a possible project to work on. We will do the work in the library to convert this PDF into a OER, an ebook that's accessible on Pressbooks. In the fall of 2019, after working through the details of our first project and the first submission on Pressbooks, myself and in the technical services department, our data management and acquisitions assistant worked on provisioning an Amazon web server volume for Pressbooks to be installed upon. Pressbooks runs on WordPress, and because WordPress is free, we were able to save quite a bit of money. I think when we looked at the hosting costs for what this would look like in supporting the faculty, Pressbooks themselves quoted us at about $14,000 per year for the support that we were looking at. That includes the setup, maintenance, multi-site installation, all that fun stuff. So rather than do that, myself and my colleague partnered together in provisioning a server, setting up the volume, installing it, configuring it to work, and went about converting this PDF into a Word document that was sanitized of any weird formatting issues, importing it into there, configuring the chapters and the question banks that he had so that it worked properly for the students. That was our first example that we utilized when Chris gave his presentation in the fall of 2019. We spent a few weeks basically testing out the printing functions, the exporting functions, the linking, the embedding into our LMS that we use on campus, Moodle, and how students would be able to access this. I wrote an article about this that I'll shamelessly plug, that'll be published, and I'll send the link out later for people who are interested in it. It goes through all of the details that I don't remember, mainly because once I put it on paper, it left my brain. But that was our first example of utilizing what we had through Pressbooks and what the work that we did on the system side to support our faculty members on campus in publishing their OER. This is outside of the purview of what Adam Hoffman did in his work. Most of that was the grounds that were set by Chris Dahl and the IPAL GEER grant.
And now I'll take it from here. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about the GEER grant and writing the process for that. I do have slides, so I'm going to share my screen. Possibly, please hold. Am I clicking something wrong?
I don't think you are, no.
Oh, there it
There you
is.
go.
Okay. Awesome. So you should be looking at my slides. Let me put them into presentation mode. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about collaborating with Professor Adam Hoffman as we wrote this grant to incorporate an OER in his class. And so Professor Adam Hoffman is the head of the Natural and Applied Sciences Department, and he's also a professor of environmental chemistry. He couldn't be here today, but I will be presenting as much information that I can on the topic regarding what he did individually when we were working on this project together. Cool. So we focused on course redesign, which was taking a course which was environmental chemistry, environmental science 380, and finding an OER textbook that would work for his class and then incorporating that into the class itself. This is the textbook that we chose. When I say we chose, I mean he chose for his class, but we both found it using various sources of OER meta finders online. So it was titled Environmental Toxicology, published in 2020 by this person. Cool. So the way that this is broken down is we have it broken down into phases of what happened when we went through each of the process throughout writing this grant. And then when we get further into the slides, each of the phases has their own mini timeline to show the different steps that we went through. And then we have it broken down even further into the individual slides of what Professor Hoffman did versus what I did and how we came together to write this grant to incorporate an OER in his classroom. Cool. So we had 5 phases, the first starting in March 2021 and ending up literally a year later in phase 5 this week. And so we started with the brainstorming phase, and Chris Dahl, like he had explained, did a really great job of promoting that this grant would be coming. And so we started talking about applying for this grant before the actual application came out. So we got on this project really, really early, which was nice. Cool. So phase 1, this was the brainstorming and preliminary research phase. So we initially got in contact March 15th of last year, and then we went through various meetings to talk about like the overall game plan, how we would write this grant proposal, and how we would find a textbook that worked for his class. So the major discussion topics that we had throughout the phase, primarily the month of March, was reasonings why the Professor Hoffman wanted to find an OER textbook, challenges that an OER textbook would alleviate in his classroom, and deciding what steps to do moving forward. Cool. So in phase one, this is what Professor Hoffman did. He discussed with his colleagues at various other institutes. He has talked a lot about working with colleagues at other institutes about toxicology in general and finding out what they liked about OERs and the challenges of working with OERs and how it worked in their classrooms. Assembled a list of potential collaborators and explored existing OER textbooks related to environmental toxicology. So during this phase, I compiled a list of OER resources. So basically your meta finders, your specific OER collections, and various LibGuides throughout all the universities across the United States. There's lots of really great resources out there. And I also attended a series of virtual information sessions hosted by the University of Iowa because they were writing a similar grant around the same time called the Open Hawks Grant for OERs. And I just want to give a shout out to librarian Burnett for answering all of my OER questions because she was very, very helpful. The two information sessions that I attended were finding OERs in your discipline and adapting and creating OERs. So I took a little bit more of the research side of it, and Adam took a little bit more of like assembling the dream team side of it. And then we move on to phase two. So as you can see from our mini timeline, April 7th, the GEER grant was now accepting applications. And so moving forward, we met every Friday throughout the semester to talk about the grant proposal and what we would add as content. The major discussion topics were we reviewed the OER grant application questions, as well as other grant applications that were similar related to writing grants for OERs. Two really helpful ones were the Open Hawks grant from the University of Iowa, and also the University of Delaware did a grant similar to this, so we looked at their questions as well. We printed out the application questions, and then we compared it to the rubric to make sure that we weren't missing anything and that everything that they were looking for in the rubric was addressed when we actually wrote the grant. And then we reviewed the Open Hawks completed proposals. We got a few of them with all the redacted information just to see what they were looking for when our proposal finally hit the panel. Cool. So during this time, the independent work that Adam did was collecting information on his department. So obviously addressing OERs was to alleviate certain things that happened in he found in his class. He found that certain students couldn't afford the textbook. The textbook that he had been using in the past cost over $100. So this would be alleviating a lot of financial burden on the students finding an OER textbook. It also was really helpful because the textbook that we found could be downloaded. So as indicated by his slides, 50% of the students in the department work off campus over 20 hours. And so a lot of students don't have access to internet all the time. So being able to find a textbook that you could download and access it off campus or on campus, but also that had been downloaded so you don't need constant internet connection would be really helpful for the students when completing their schoolwork. And then what I did during this session, this particular section, was I found the other schools that had applied for grants similar to this, the Open Hawks one, but the University of Delaware one. The reason we were looking at this is because the University of Delaware grant actually had other questions that our grant did not in the application. So the University of Delaware had a really unique section about the sustainability of using OERs. So we liked that and we wanted to incorporate it into our grant proposal, even though our grant questions didn't necessarily need to be addressed, the sustainability of it. But we wanted to address that regardless because we thought that was a really unique aspect to talk about. And then we also printed the application, which is the top thing, top image I have right here. And then we compared it to the rubric to identify any gaps. So for example, the rubric wanted information on certain things such as feasibility and cost cuttings or cost savings using an OER textbook, but those weren't necessarily reflected in the application grant questions. So we wanted to make sure we got everything covered. So we went through and figured out where there needed to be that information in what section it would belong in our grant proposal. During this time, I also compiled a list of other OERs to use in the classroom, such as TED Talks and podcasts and any kind of like videos I could find relating to toxicology, so that there was a lot of different types of media that students could use when learning the subject. Well, moving on to phase 3. So this was the application phase. So we pulled all of our resources together, and then we started working on writing the actual grant proposal. And we incorporated other people into the project with us, because collaboration is key. So we worked on the content, and then we also invited Deborah Stork, who is the Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning here at UD, and also Hannah Horsfeld, who is a science secondary education student, to get involved with the project with us. So we discussed during this preliminary time of how the OER grant would, or the textbook would, fulfill the Quality Matters initiative here at UD. And then most of this month, when we met every Friday, was writing, editing, revising our drafts to make sure that we covered everything that could be possibly asked of us in our grant proposal. And so it was due June 1st, and we submitted it May 28th. And so then we just had to wait and see what we heard. This is our dream team. I was really excited because I'm actually wearing the same shirt, and that picture was taken 7 years ago. So yeah, for Orange. But this is us. This is the dream team for the OER grant proposal that we wrote. During this phase, Professor Hoffman worked by meeting with Deborah Stork to look at the Quality Matters rubric and mapping out the course requirements, developing weekly assignments that were related to the various OERs he'd be using in his classroom, not just the textbook. So like he had these fun things like Film Fridays, Manuscripts Mondays, and Fun Friday readings. And then we also clarified the role of what other people would be doing. So Hannah would be reviewing the content and developing an activity for class to get her involved in the education side of it. And Deborah Stork would be reviewing the content to make sure that it follows the Quality Matters initiative here on campus. And then the image he has is one of the manuscripts he used for Manuscripts Monday. Cool, phase 4. We found out July 1st that our grant had been funded, so we were very excited. And then we got down to work, because then we had to put all of our work to action. And we met again with Deborah Stork, again, to talk about Quality Matters initiatives. And we met to see how we could incorporate the OER textbook into his classroom. And this is when, next slide, Professor Hoffman got involved with more Quality Matters here on campus. During this time, he also presented with the director, Chris Dahl, here at the library for our Teaching and Learning Conference Days, which were August of last year, talking about his experience of writing the grant for the OER, and just trying to bring awareness that this was a grant that people could still apply for, because there were 2 rounds of it, and that how collaborating with various people on campus made this possible. And he also attended the Quality Matters training to make sure that everything was up to par in class. And then, yes, phase 5. So this actually took place this year. This started January. I should go back. Let me go back a slide. What also happened in this phase was that he actually used his OER textbook in the classroom. So this phase 5, was the evaluation of using it. So he used it for the first time in fall of 2021, so September through December. And then so January through March of this year, it's been evaluating the process and the different things that he did using the OER in the classroom last semester. And then, so we've come full circle. It was almost a year, kind of to the week, because we started March 15th of last year when we began this process, and now it's March 3rd. So we were almost there. And then basically we wanted to point out that this took a lot of people. We got a lot of people involved on campus, and it was definitely a labor of love. We met almost every week throughout the semester to make sure that our grant proposal was as strong as it could possibly be. And then moving forward, it was about evaluating how the OER textbook worked in his classroom. Cool. So he had asked the students to evaluate the classroom. I won't go through all of these individually, but as you can tell, based on the scores, a lot of the students either agree or strongly disagree with the things that were asked of them. 100% of the students felt that compared to other textbooks, that the free textbook online for the OER was better than they had used in the past. And 100% of the students also said they would recommend this course to other students, which I thought was really exciting. And also 100% of students said that they were able to relate toxicology to their everyday lives. And then the rest of them were the other various OERs he had done in his class and the activities he had done, and those also got really strong scores. So the students really really enjoyed using this OER textbook and the things that took place last semester. Cool, so moving forward, OER resources that worked well, he wanted to continue to search for more OERs to use in classrooms, to use in his classroom, and to make sure that everything stays up to date. The final assignment, he did want to tweak a little bit because the students wrote a section of the OER textbook. It wasn't completed. There's currently 6 chapters in the textbook that was selected to use in his classroom. And so it wasn't a full textbook in the sense that it wasn't like a completed thing. So what he had the students do was actually write a chapter themselves. And he wanted to tweak that a little bit, that assignment a little bit for next semester. The students enjoyed the changes overall and plans on compiling all of the resources they used into one particular document to share. I'm assuming with other toxicology professors at other universities, because he's really all about collaborating. Cool, are there any questions? That was a lot of information very fast. So if you want me to repeat anything, I am totally okay with that. Also, this is the email. You can email us if you think of any questions later as well. I will stop sharing my screen. Oh, we did
Yes, no, thank you very much. That was wonderful, right? And so lots to share. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, you may place any questions you have in the chat and we'll address those. So there is one. What was the Manuscript Monday activity?
So I can't really elaborate without Professor Hoffman being here. He did send me one of the manuscripts, which is a chapter from a book. So I'm assuming, I can't say this for certain, that it was taking various manuscripts that he had found on various topics relating to toxicology and having the students read them. I would highly recommend emailing us that question, and then I can forward that along to him. I'll also put the email in the chat.
Yeah, one of the downsides is that we can speak on what we have and what we were told and things that we worked with on the 2 people who unfortunately are not here today. But any specific information that would be related to, like Jess said, the actual classroom application things, or with Chris Dahl, the administrative work that was done. I don't know all the details on the work that was done from Chris. I only know the pieces where it kind of intersected with what we worked on. And so any questions that you might have that might be very specific examples of those for the 2 people that may want to get to later, we can go ahead and forward them off to them. I think the plan is that we'll kind of disseminate who can answer what based on what is sent to the reference email, and then kind of get them to fill in and answer back with any answers that they might have.
Oh, I said Jenny's question. Thank you both. Oh, I don't have to read that part, I guess. Sorry. Did you lay out your phases ahead of time, or looking back on the project, do they fit into logical steps, sections, or phases? Yes. So what I did this past week was I hand drew a timeline of everything that Professor Hoffman and I did together. And it was super convoluted and very difficult to read. So then I was like, maybe if I broke this down into various steps and chunks of time, because it did fit better into like chunks of time, because we specifically looked at like compiling all of our research, then pulling all of our research together, then working on the application, and then using it in the classroom. So it kind of broke down easily in that way. And that's why some of them were shorter months and then some of them were larger gaps of time. Yes, great question.
What was the biggest hurdle that each of you faced in this overall effort? You go first.
I'm thinking. I learned a lot of what OERs are between like all the info sessions that I went to and then the talks that Chris Dahl did on campus. And so just learning a lot about like the background information of OERs, that was really, I don't know if I would say it's a hurdle, but it's definitely something that I've learned more about. And I really like that OER is promoting access to information with all of these barriers.
I had a lot of fun kind of in all the conversations that we got to have. I don't generally like to be the one that says like, oh no, we can't do that. So I'm always just telling Chris like, we should do this, we should do this. And most of the time he just says, no, it's not feasible. No, that's not cool. But it was really awesome on my personal, just on a personal level for him to say, yeah, this is something that we could scale, that we could use in the university because it aligns with some of my kind of core values myself, making information free and accessible and for everybody to just be able to access things. Probably the biggest hurdle that I faced was when we initially had the conversation at the IPAL meeting, we weren't able to really connect with a lot of other librarians and libraries at that time, primarily due to other, if not mitigating circumstances, that's not the right phrase. They already had prior commitments. And so we were kind of late to the table, so to speak. One of the things that we ended up learning from that, though, is how to leverage being a smaller private institution to our advantage. We learned to be, it's something that's used in programming, and I hate the phrase, but it's agile development. It's making a lot of mistakes and moving really quickly while also moving forward. I don't like that phrase for a variety of reasons, but being a smaller staff, a smaller library allowed us to make immediate connections. It allowed us to deploy, like in my end, Pressbooks really easily, get everything working on a shorter timeline than it might have been if we had a lot of buy-in from a variety of other organizations. And then it ended up working out really well. Like the keynote speaker said, you have to leverage your luck when you have it. So we got really lucky that timeline-wise, while all of these phases were underway by the work that Adam and Jess were doing, we had already put in the work behind the scenes to kind of leverage the GEER grant and being able to apply for this stuff so we could provide that information. It was, once the ball got rolling, it's been a lot of fun. Once the difficulties, the initial hurdles of having those conversations and getting the initial buy-in were done with, it was pretty good. It paid off, I think.
What was something that surprised you throughout the process? I'm trying to think. Surprised.
I was surprised to learn how many faculty members or students even were unaware what open access meant, what open educational resources were, and why they would benefit them. It's something that I'm very passionate about, like DRM-free open educational resources or unlimited usage DRM-free materials. So it was surprising and also it was very satisfying to see them kind of connect the pieces to their own situation. That was very gratifying kind of throughout the process too.
So mine's the exact opposite. I was surprised at how many people already used OERs in the classroom on campus here at UD, and learning about them throughout this entire process. It was really cool to see the people who had already started working on them before the grant had even become like a concept. And yeah, it was surprising how many people had already incorporated those into their curriculum already.
Do you have ideas on where your OER work will head in the future? I can speak on that from the technical side. So in addition to Pressbooks, we also run an open journal systems instance. It allows for essentially the way we have it set up, anyone on campus, whether they be a faculty member, a department member, or a department itself, they can create an academic journal that has the capability of going through a blind review, double blind review. The system is scalable. The system is applicable to any number of journal types that may be of interest to faculty members. So we've been working on getting more students involved with that. On the Pressbook side, because we're a part of the IPAL grant and working with the faculty members on campus, there are two current faculty members in different departments, one in the English department and one in the psychology department, who are leveraging Pressbooks right now to go through and create their OER materials, as well as one in the philosophy department who's completely writing his own materials from scratch. So all of those were made possible because of the buy-in that we already had from administration, from the opportunities made to present on stuff and actually get people the information when they needed it. And also the support that we have from myself, my colleague, and anyone else that might be willing to help at a drop of a dime when something goes wrong. That's sometimes a frustrating point too, when something is supposed to work and then it doesn't, but I mean, that's just computers in general, when it's great until it's not. But so far, I don't think, and I can't speak to Chris and what he might have in mind. I know getting the GEER grant and pushing for this IPAL grant was a big goal of his, just based on other research that he did. he had an article that was published about how international students leverage and utilize materials and research in classes. And some of that research that he learned from that was used in support of pushing for OER materials, in support of getting access to open access journals. And so I know that the presentation that he gave at the Teaching and Learning Conference in August mentioned a lot of statistics and numbers, cost saving measures, but he might be a great resource to ask too if you want to send him a quick email in the reference email, and we'll forward that on to him.
Yeah, I think for our side of it, do you have any ideas on where OERs would head in the future? Be making sure that they're sustainable in the sense that the science information becomes outdated so quickly. So just making sure that everything stays up to date and like finding those new resources as they come, and even creating some of their own just to make sure that all the information is still accurate and that the students are still getting the best information possible.
Thank you. Oh, there's another question in there for you.
You mentioned a philosophy professor. That
Yeah.
was you.
So are they open to sharing their work? So one of the things that we're really happy about with our current basically setup is that all of the work can be found on one of two places. So I can type it out in the chat really quick. Let me scoot in here. The instance that we have that's publicly available is just our unique instance of Pressbooks, pressbooks.dbq.edu. It has all of the published work by the faculty members who, in their process of writing the OERs, may choose to make maybe one or two chapters available immediately because they're done and worked on, and some other chapters that may not be accessible. They should all be discoverable on that site. We've gone through the measures to make sure that everything has the Creative Commons, I think it's the 4 license attached to it that allows for reading, distributing, remixing, all of that fun stuff. And I know that his specific book was a part of the grant that he's working on in both semesters. So he started the work in the fall and he's continuing the work this semester. So I think his particular project is split into 2 sections, but in a way, we took a lot of the kind of template information from one of the presenters, the professor in science from the University of Iowa, which I can't remember his name, even though he's probably on the schedule and I could look him up. He spoke yesterday about the work that he did in the 2 sections of his class that went for 1 year, that the students were actually paid out of the grant to create the materials. We were able to see him present on the topic before and ask him a lot of questions on what that looked like in creating the materials. So we took a lot of his advice and template style in putting together what we have here.
That's awesome. So what is Jess and Joe, what is UD doing to share all of this great information and the things you're doing with students? Is there some type of sharing you're doing with that? I know faculty, you're working, collaborating with faculty, building all these resources, but how are you sharing that information with students?
I think you can speak on what Adam does and all.
Yeah, so what Professor Hoffman did was bring that into the classroom. A lot of it was designed so that he could use those really fun things that he did in the class. I don't want to speak too much on it because I don't want to mess up the details and give you wrong information. But yeah, tying those into the different activities that he did throughout the semester, and then incorporating that OER into the textbook so that students could use it every day for their assignments.
For the faculty members that I've assisted just mainly on like setting up their accounts where they've taken really the charge of making their own materials, we've just provided kind of the background support. The content is immediately embedded into their teaching lessons on Moodle, our LMS that we utilize. Everything is linked on there for the students to access. The links are, they're just embedded in their normal weekly learning content, depending on what they might be covering. I know at least for the English faculty member, I was able to work with her students because she's using the Pressbooks platform as the publishing platform for her advanced composition students. So in their project, they're actually writing their own book. And so we're also leveraging the project to support the students' work in addition to showcase to them, well, your faculty are doing these same things. You know, we want you to not only experience this stuff, but also be able to participate in that. It's not quite the same as some of the other faculty members have talked about, in which they work through the content in class, and then they all collaborate and create either that Google site that was the keynote speaker from yesterday, or creating the content like the professor at the University of Iowa. But they're working on their own content and leveraging a lot of the same tools. So if it's not embedded directly into their content pieces, as part of the grant, Jenny Breams was very kind and linked the IPAL OER projects so that they're publicly accessible as part of this grant proposal pieces. That was one of the things that we had to make sure our site met the standards, and enabling the Creative Commons license for people to know, I can use this, I can take this, remix it, download it, do whatever I want with it. In terms of the other work that we do, we promote it on campus. We talk about it at our faculty meetings. Chris Dahl takes every effort that he can to name drop as much as possible the grant information and the ways that people have already utilized this stuff to highlight the work that the colleagues are doing. We have in the library a hosted event that we go about every year. It's our faculty and staff celebration of scholarship and creativity. So we highlight the work to other faculty. Our goal is to just give it as much word of mouth as possible so that they take the message on themselves too. We have support from our administration who shouts us out at faculty meetings as well. For the students, it's really, I mean, they must be hearing it somewhere because I know that they're using it. If it's not embedded in their class, when librarians have sessions, I point to some of the work their faculty do and have talked about too. So I try my best to also leverage and support the other members of the institution that way.
Thank you. Yes, we're getting close on time. Are there any last questions for Joe and Jess? I'm placing that was the Pressbooks. The reference email address one last time in the chat for you. If you do have any questions for them here following, that you can email them. Jess, Joe, thank you so very much again for sharing all this information. The positive inspiration for collaboration is wonderful. So thank you very much for sharing.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for asking questions.